So I was talking to one of my neighbors about sports, and he said something that caught me off guard. He said, our team, we need more white players. And I was I was kind of caught off guard by that, right? And I remembered my head snapping back, and I thought to myself, why would you think that black people are not enough? So this is what I'm thinking in my head. But my knee jerk response to him was, no, we don't need more white players. Like what is like what like what like we have such and such. This person's an all star. We have this person, this group. It's like I couldn't understand the logic and the saying. I don't know anybody that will come to that conclusion. So why would anybody make that statement? And so these are some of the things that sort of took me down a rabbit hole of thoughts. But we have to understand this is something structural that has happened. It's historical that has happened. It's not natural. It's not just leaving black people alone in their environments and then we sort of come up with these ideas about ourselves. That's not what's happening. It's something else far more nefarious, far more powerful happening that's leading some of us, if not too many of us, to think like this, to think about ourselves in a way that's counterproductive, and to think about white folks as somehow more superior. We're doing this to ourselves, right? But why that's happening is another conversation. It's not a natural course that's being run. There's something happening structurally and systemically. So there are 3 points that I'm going to make as I have these conversations. Starting with the first one, black self-doubt and the search for white approval. So one of the greatest damages done to black Americans was not just segregation or economic exclusion. It was the cultivation of doubt. Some could even argue that the segregation and the economic exclusion that was imposed upon us in the period right after enslavement had ended, right up and through the Jim Crow period, which was this 100-year period in time, was some would argue that it was the best thing that could have happened to us. And the reason why people would make that argument is because black communities were self-reliant, self-sustained. They relied on each other for their survival. So they were more communal. There was no white interference because the law mandated that not happen. So we had to rely on each other. And if you look at the ways in which we were able to, create systems and structures for ourselves that have proven to stand the test of time and that have proven to have been extremely effective. So this is why some people will argue that segregation and the economic exclusion that happened wasn't a bad thing, right? But it did help to spread doubt and to cultivate doubt amongst us. And a lot of that doubt manifests in, the inferiority ideas about black neighborhoods, about black leadership as being dangerous, about black schools and communities being broken. Black people can't govern themselves. Black itself needs outside validation. So these are the sort of doubts that have been able to fester and evolve within black communities. And like I said, a lot of this has been really structural. It's been structural, right? And so we have to, figure out ways, to unlearn these really problematic ideas that we have about who we are and what we're capable of, because the proof is all around us. And, we live in a society, we live in a society that works very hard and tirelessly to plant and to nurture those seeds of doubt about us and to spread them across the globe. Now, granted, I'm not sitting here saying that black people don't have agency. The agency is in the proof all around us when we look at the examples of extraordinary accomplishment amongst us. So that's the agency in and of itself, or that's the argument for the agency in and of itself. So I'm not suggesting that that doesn't exist. Now, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, structures and systems in place are very powerful, and we should not include them into how we think about what is happening around us. Right. And so the doubt, right, and the ways that it shows up, right, like the ways that it shows up are, whether it's in sports, so like the example that I just gave, the ways in which in some cases some athletes are more inclined to listen to white coaches as opposed to black coaches, or they have a preference for white coaches as opposed to black coaches, etc. And it's not because they're more competent. It's because a lot of times these owners, in most cases, these owners are, wealthy white men, and they're more comfortable. They give more of a leash, so to speak, to their white coaches who are just as bad, or who struggle just as bad, right? They give less of a leash to black coaches for the sheer numbers, right? There are far more white coaches across the sports, far more white coaches in general manners than there are black ones, even though the sport has historically been dominated by black athletes, right? So, not every sport, but the biggest ones in the U.S., specifically basketball and football, have been dominated by black athletes. And yet we don't have as many black coaches. And when we do have them, their leashes are not as long as their white counterparts. And so it shows up in sports. It shows up in beauty standards, right? It shows up in schools, the ways in which black students are doubted, the ways in which doubt is festered in our schools, or I should say the ways in which doubt is cultivated in our schools amongst black children, even amongst teachers, the ways in which teachers doubt black students, right? It shows up, it's systemic. Like all the research, indicates this. Like there's so many lanes of research, so much interdisciplinary research that talks about the ways in which this happens, and the ways in which these doubts show up in schools. And so across the various disciplines in education, so whether it's teacher education, whether it's school leadership, whether it's school psychology, whether it's higher education, whether it's K through 12 education, the various lanes, the research is overwhelming. Hiring practices, right? Sometimes black folks are turned away just off the strength of their name that shows up on the application. Or if it's not as crystal clear by the name, like say, for example, if your name is James Wright, they might think that you're a white guy. That happened to me once. And so then you show up for the interview, and then they realize that James Wright is not a white guy. And now, the facial expressions change. So hiring, media, the ways in which, media frames black folks, right? And the ways in which media sows these seeds of doubt, politics, etc., right? So even within our relationships with each other, right? The ways that we laud, and by we, the ways in which black folks laud white mediocrity and amplify white people who partake in anything or any aspect of black culture, no matter how basic it is. We elevate it. We send out invites to the cookout. We open up all of our spaces, all of our sacred spaces to people just for showing a modicum of interest in black culture. And yet we're so hard on each other. And the scary part is sometimes we don't even recognize it anymore because it has become so normal. So this isn't about blaming, individuals. It's about looking at like these big structures and systems that are at play, and the fact that black folks internalize the idea that whiteness equates legitimacy, or that whiteness equates authenticity or authority, right? Like the need for it, right? So this is number one. This is black self-doubt and the search for white approval, number one. Now, number two, replacement reorientation, and historical memory. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, this point is harder to discuss, but it is very important. And I'm going to have to take my time to make this argument because this can easily get sidetracked, and what I mean can easily be misunderstood. So I need for this to be crystal clear. Replacement, reorientation, and historical memory. Over time, Black Americans, particularly, specifically, those of us who are the descendants of enslavement and the descendants of the Jim Crow legislation, and those of us who are related some way, form, or fashion to the Great Migration trajectory. The Great Migration was the mass movement of Black Americans from the South to the various parts of the U.S., be it Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Oakland. These Black Americans have increasingly been sidelined politically, culturally, and institutionally. And they have been replaced by immigrants. Now, this is not an attack on immigrants. This is a very difficult conversation to have because of all the xenophobia that is happening. I'm not partaking in that. And I'm because we have to understand, and every situation is different. So like what's happening in, for example, South Africa doesn't apply to what's happening here, or at least I'm not informed. My analysis is not informed by what's happening in South Africa. Whether it be to not mention it because of the devastation that's happening, or to mention it because of it. It has nothing to do with it. It also has nothing to do with the MAGA movement and the idea of building a wall, right? Like what I'm saying has nothing to do with either of those things. What I'm speaking about is Black America and what happened to Black Americans. And I'm looking at it from a structural, political, legal standpoint, right? And that is the point that I am making. This has nothing to do with immigrants or immigration for that matter, because we as Black Americans are not responsible for those laws. We as Black Americans are not responsible for these political decisions. This is me talking about making an analysis of what happened or what is happening to Black Americans. With all of the danger that comes with these kinds of conversations, I am acknowledging that. So the ways in which our country engages with, foreign nations, the ways in which we have made it a political destiny and journey to help to destabilize nations across the globe has led to a lot of the immigration crises that has sort of plagued the U.S., for the last X amount of decades. These are, wars that have been fought, leading to, refugees and leading to the total and utter destruction of nations, etc. And as a result, forcing, these large campaigns of immigration. So this has nothing to do with Black Americans. These are political decisions by the United States. And these are some of the consequences of that. But we have to look at how this affects us. We have to look at how this affects not only the country, but specifically Black Americans in general. So I always say that the thing about the United States, like I'm less concerned about the United States being attacked by some foreign government. What is happening or what happens to the United States is its own unraveling, its own undoing because of its greed, because of its lack of morality, because of her lack of integrity as a nation, and its lack of loyalty to its people, right? Its lack of investment in its future. It's very intentional way of undercutting It's educational institutions, right? Because if you divest, or when you divest from the educational infrastructure of your country, you've made a choice to divest from your future as a nation. This is easy to see as when you look at countries who have evolved, or nations who have evolved over the last 50 years or so, right? Be it China, and you look at, for example, you look at the investment that China makes in its people. You look at the fact that, Chinese migrants to the U.S. to get, or to different parts of the world to get education, or just the building up of its own educational institutions within China. The same with various other countries across the globe, like developing nations who invest in their educational future. They invest heavily. They import educators from different parts of the world to teach their children. And in many cases, these are the best. These are the best educators. They're treated well. They're paid well, right? Which is why a lot of them, leave their countries to go to these places, because they pay well. And so when we have campaigns of divesting in education, this is part of that. This is part of trying to sell this image of excluding Black Americans from the fundamental image of the United States. This is part of the campaign. This is part of that campaign, right? Our relationship to this country was forged through slavery, segregation, labor exploitation, lynching, the civil rights struggle, and democratic protests. So the mere fact that different immigrant groups can even come here are the results of the struggles and the impetus of Black American organizations and Black American leaders throughout history. So when I ask the question, what happened to Black Americans? Like, part of that question is, what happened to that? How did that part of America, which Black Americans were always at the forefront, what happened to that? And when you replace it with groups who don't have the same connection to America, who don't even have the same access to education, because remember, we've divested from education. The only thing that America is interested in now educationally is STEM. This is where all our money goes. We've divested from the humanities. So we don't want people learning about history, about sociology, about the politics of the nation. And if we do, or when we do, it is a very whitewashed version of it. And so when people come into the United States, by and large, they have very limited access to teaching and studies on the real, true history of what the United States is. Instead, they are given a whitewashed, sanitized version of what the United States is. And we're starting to see some of that unravel, but it's with great cost. It's coming at great cost. And so, when we see like the attacks on critical race theory, we see the banning, the book bans, as I mentioned, the divestment from humanities and history, and the weakening, or if not the fundamental dismantling and destruction of Black political organizations and leadership and leaders. As historical memory disappears, so does the ability to recognize what is happening. Black Americans understand these struggles, not necessarily from textbooks, but from family members, from memory, from lived experiences, and part of an inheritance of survival and survival knowledge. And that distinction matters. And to disenfranchise that group is very intentional, and to replace them with groups who have no such history and no such knowledge base. And why would they? When, as I just mentioned, and as I just stated, we have divested from education in this country. And we've invested in a version of it that is whitewashed and STEM oriented. We want people to help build our institutions. We don't want people helping to rebuild our societies. As our societies and our communities all around us are crumbling and fracturing, we don't want people investing in building people. We want people building things. That's what the United States has become. Number 3, where are Black communities today? So I recently met a brother. We bumped into each other at one of the local coffee shops, and we struck up this conversation. He's a brilliant younger brother, who he does a lot of really important work. He's an entrepreneur, and he also he works in sports, and he has his hand in quite a few projects. But the brother is brilliant. I was, and he just happened to sit next to me, and we ended up striking up a conversation, just random, organic. And so one of the things he asked was, he said, I shared with him what I did, and as a professor, and the kind of research that I'm involved in, and then he took an interest in that, and then the conversation sort of like took off from there. And one of the things that he kind of asked or surmised was, where are Black communities? And what he meant by that was he elaborated on, the lack of elders that he could pull from. And he understood that, like as a younger man, a younger Black man, he understood the value in wanting to pull from his elders. And he was sort of indicating some frustration that there weren't a lot around him. He was like, there would be these sparks periodically, but nothing sustainable and nothing really organized and institutionalized. And he was sort of asking me, what I thought about that. And that question stayed with me, because many of the Black communities that people imagine, they don't exist in the same way. I mean, they exist, but not in the same way. A lot of the Black organizations that made the Black struggle so popular and so global was because they worked within organic organizations and institutions. Now those have been displaced. They no longer exist, or they have been infiltrated, or they are a shell of themselves. And we can go on and name those organizations and those institutions. We can name them. They're nameable. The ones that existed then are a shell of themselves. The ones who don't exist today, they have been displaced, or they have been removed or excavated. Our communities, our potential leaders have been over-policed. People within our communities have been fragmented, economically abandoned, or absorbed into systems that have weakened the collective life source for us. And so this is essentially what has happened to Black communities. And then, I would add to that, a lot of us are just distraught, or if not traumatized, by the things that have happened to our leaders historically. The political imprisonment, the assassinations, the disenfranchisement through covert police activity, the wanting to, just sort of lay low and just be there for their family members and maybe live long enough to see their grandkids. A lot of Black potential leaders are choosing these safer routes. Whether that's good or bad, I mean, it's what it is. People are just simply trying to survive quietly, avoid risk. A lot of us, we don't trust institutions. We don't trust movements anymore. COINTELPRO is the federal government's counterintelligence program. Click here for the video on that. Is a good reason why. And then on the flip side of that, when we look at the people who are propped up as Black leaders, they're not by and large the result of any organic processes as they were in the past. They didn't come through grassroots organizations. They mostly come as a result of corporate or higher education institutions, who designate people who prop people up, behind an institution or behind a corporation, or or platform through media outlets. This is not organic. So the people who present themselves as Black leaders, this is usually how they emerge. They emerge in these inorganic ways. But historically, we have to be mindful when we talk about, where our Black communities. We're talking about the intergenerational relationships between elders and mentors and neighborhood accountability, community memory, informal guidance. We had these things. Like, I'm old enough to remember as a young child, before the crack epidemic, our communities were rife with elders and mentors and neighborhood accountability. We didn't really rely on police in that way in our neighborhoods. We knew it was certain people in our neighborhoods that if things got out of hand, those people would be called on, and those people were enforcers in a way that the community could entrust and that the community found and deemed more reliable, right? And the community memory, the ways in which things were passed on amongst communities for generations, right? And the guidance, and just having a neighbor or a friend who was an aspiring doctor, or who was in law school, or who was like the elite athlete, right? You see them going about their business every day, right? You see the athlete in the park, working out and busting his butt. And then, it pays off when he ends up in the NBA or in the NFL. And so for people who want to follow that route, they saw the work. Informal guidance. And the same with the guy or the girl, or the young lady who was in med school or in law school, or working on his or her PhD, right? And then having the conversations with the younger kids in the neighborhood and giving the younger kids something to strive for. I'm a product of this. I'm a product of having someone like Dr. Chris Love, who was tragically murdered as a PhD student, as a young man. He's 26 years old. And I was like a teenager, and I looked up to him. And he was someone that, always advised me and always made it known that I could do what he did, right? And not only that, but was always encouraging me and always pushing me. And he lived in my neighborhood, and he was the only one in my neighborhood, the only one from our generation that had achieved that level of academic success. And so for me as a young kid, he never got a chance. They gave him his PhD posthumously after he was murdered. But he was the one who I planted the seed in my head, that I could attain a doctorate degree. And, as a young kid, if it wasn't for that image that he gave, that he left, I wouldn't have given it any much thought. And so this is what you lose. We lose this when we talk about intergenerational relationships, right? The informal guidance, right? The mentors, the neighborhood accountability. Our communities have survived because we counseled each other, the elders and the younger seeking the counsel of their elders. And, we had examples. The young people had examples all around us. The leadership was visible and accessible. And it didn't have a name. It just was. So this episode is really about decoding and uncovering. It's not about blaming anybody. It's about taking a hard look at ourselves. As Black Americans, we are loving and forgiving people. But at the same time, we have sort of awakened to the ways in which our good nature have been taken advantage of by a lot of groups and people who we have opened our doors for. We're aware of that. And people can't get mad when we call that out. And even if they do, who cares? If they do get mad, who cares at this point? When you betray somebody, once the label of betrayal is attached to a person or to a group, the relationship ends. The relationship fractures. The relationship is no longer what it was before, after betrayal. So the fact that Black Americans have historically opened their arms to so many groups of people and helped so many groups of people navigate the United States, coming from different parts of the world, and then to have those people in real time betray those relationships or ignore them or lie about them, it's unforgivable. That's just the reality. The bottom line is this. If we don't understand what happened to Black communities, and if we don't talk about what happened to Black communities, if we don't have these really difficult conversations, maybe even uncomfortable conversations about what happened to Black communities, we will keep misdiagnosing and keep misunderstanding the conditions that are right in our faces today. So maybe the deeper question is, what's wrong with Black people? No, for real. Like, what's wrong with Black folks? What were the things, the structures, the systems, the organizations, the institutions, the powerful individuals, and etc.? What were those things that produced the conditions that we see now? And when are we going to take the responses to those questions seriously? That's it for now, y'all. Peace.
Word up, quick to set it, don't wet it. Real niggas lick shots, peace, Connecticut.
Yo, what up, yo? Time is running out, it's for real, though. Let's connect, politics, get on.